Trevone Boykin is the best TCU quarterback of all time. I'll tell you why I think that and why we're talking about it next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're also available wherever it is you get your podcast. We're talking about the best TCU quarterback of all time today. We are about 5 days away from fall camp starting. Josh Hoover will take the helm for the Frogs. Looks like he's going to be your QB1 this upcoming season. He'll get practice reps underway after missing the spring. And you might wonder, why are we talking about this? Well, Drake Toll from Locked On Big 12, which is another great podcast. It's part of our network that you should check out. He, the other day on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call that service, tweeted out, hey, who is the best quarterback for each Big 12 school or your respective Big 12 school? And so I took that question and I thought, well, I want to make a poll and see what people think, because I figured folks would be sort of split based on era, time on campus, when their peak fandom was, whatever the case is. And so these were the options that I came up with. I got about 200 responses, very scientific poll that we did here. And I put Trevone Boykin, Andy Dalton, Davey O'Brien, and Max Duggan. Boykin finished first with 44% of the vote. Dalton with 22% of the vote. Duggan with 17% of the vote. And Davey O'Brien also had 17% of the vote. I left Sammy Baugh off the list in place of Duggan, and I said on social media, I was like, I know that might be a little controversial, but this is just what I think. Here's the thing with Sammy Baugh and Davey O'Brien. Amazing players. I mean, Davey O'Brien has an award named after him. And as far as accomplishments go, it's really hard to argue that he's not the best. He won a Heisman Trophy. He won a Maxwell Award. He won he was part of the team that won a national championship in 1938. All-American, all those things. He was a huge part of the game changing. Dutch Meyer let his team throw the football around. They ran a form of the spread offense at that time that was very groundbreaking and led to a lot of advancements in the sport. And so all those things kind of speak for themselves. It's just really tough for me. Like, I have no idea how to compare those eras. And Shehan Jayaranja from CBS Sports, he was looking over it and he was like, I think you just have to consider it as what did they do in their specific era. So, I mean, Davey O'Brien was dominant in his era. So was Sammy Baugh. And they won national titles, right, in 35 and 38. And they were All-Americans and all these things. But it was just such a different brand of football and such a different game that it's really tough for me to compare those. And, I mean, like, the stats were impressive at the time. He threw for 1,400 yards and 19 touchdowns in 1938, which was unheard of. It was a Southwest Conference record. But, I mean, that's like half a season now for most QBs. And I get it. It's a totally different game. It's advanced a lot. But still, I can't get over how long ago it was and what just a different brand of football and type of competition that he was playing against. But they were both fantastic quarterbacks. So to me, it really comes down to the three in the modern era: Dalton, Boykin, and Duggan. And the reason I ended up getting down to the final two, which in my mind are Trevone Boykin and Andy Dalton, is just a consistency factor. I mean, Max really just had one outstanding season. You know, going into that his last year, there was a huge debate all offseason. Okay, what's going to happen between him and Chandler Morris? And thankfully, I mean, we can all be grateful for the fact that eventually Max got a chance to play. And when he did, he took that opportunity and ran with it. He became the heartbeat of that team. And he did it in an amazing way. Like, he was a dual threat QB. And I feel like with Duggan, we always kind of get focused on the intangibles. And he was an incredible leader, and he led the team really well. But he was also an outstanding athlete. And he put up, you know, some crazy numbers: 9,618 passing yards in his career, 60% completion percentage. It's kind of crazy, these three guys, like how similar their numbers are. 73 touchdowns, 28 picks through the air, 1,856 rushing yards, 28 touchdowns. His best season was obviously in 2022 when he threw for 3,698 yards, ran for 423, 41 total touchdowns, 32 passing, 9 rushing. Over his career, he went 25 and 18 as a starter. And that's really the difference maker to me, is it was an up and down career for him. 2019 as a freshman, now he was in and out of the lineup all the time because him and Alex Delton were splitting time for the first few games, but eventually he took over. And I think that year when I was calculating it, just kind of looking at each individual game, and okay, did he start this team? He went 3-6. Then 2020 he went 5-4. 2021 was a rough season for everybody, but it all came together in 2022. But ultimately, just not having that consistent quality play over his career affected him in this conversation, in this debate. So you get to Boykin and Dalton, and man, I mean, you talk about two guys who launched the program into a different stratosphere. Obviously, what Andy did, taking a team that had gotten on the map and was starting to make that climb again, eventually getting them to win a BCS game in the Rose Bowl, winning 2 Mountain West Conference titles. He was 42-8 as a starter. I mean, he was a winner, like plain and simple. Now, obviously in the Mountain West, it wasn't the Big 12, but still some huge games against Utah that he won. He did eventually get those conference titles. He got TCU to the Fiesta Bowl, to the Rose Bowl. And, I mean, I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know some people still think the Rose Bowl is maybe the biggest win in program history just because of what it meant for TCU at that time and how it really was a launching pad to get them back where they belonged in the Power 5. I still say college football playoff win because there's just so few teams that have that. And I think especially since it happened in the 4-team playoff era, it was truly special. In both cases, nobody really expected the Frogs to get it done, but in both cases they did. And making the national title game in this era of football is insane. And of course, Duggan was the QB for that. But Andy Dalton had an amazing career. 10,314 passing yards. I mean, he owned every record when he left school. 61% completion percentage, 71 touchdowns, 30 picks, over 1,600 rushing yards. His best season was in 2010, even though 2010 and 2009 are very similar. 2,857 passing yards, 435 on the ground, 33 total touchdowns. And again, 42-8 as a starter. And people that said, Dalton and his winning are really what puts him over the top, I'd agree with that. But I think also, he was just a great QB. It wasn't like he had an amazing team, and because of that, they won a lot of games. But, he wasn't a bus driver. He was a difference maker. He was dynamic. He was making things happen. But ultimately, I decided on Trevone Boykin. And this is a hard question to ask. A lot of you responded to me, and you're like, well, how do you define best? Is it talent? Is it what they did for the program, how they won, all those things? Well, I feel like, one, that's the fun of the question, is you can really define it how you want. And that's why I want to hear from you in the YouTube comments, or you tweet at me at SimcockSteven, because everybody's going to have their different reasons for it. And, Trey kind of struggled early in his career. That redshirt freshman season, Casey gets in trouble, and all of a sudden he's thrust into this new role not new role because he was back at QB, but I remember before that Iowa State game, they were, he was practicing at running back because they thought maybe you would have to play there that week, and then all of a sudden he's going to have to start at QB. And you saw the flashes. You saw that big win against Baylor in 2012. He had some great moments. The win in Morgantown against West Virginia, where they had the huge 2-point conversion and walked it off in overtime. But you also had the head-scratching decisions. And I think at that time, a guy that was really just kind of relying on his athleticism to make it happen. But as he grew as a QB, you saw he had an incredible arm, an ability like really nobody else to make plays off schedule. And he was so dynamic. So for me, it's a combination of all those things. And he won. I mean, he won at a high level. Those last 2 seasons, 2014 and 2015, I mean, he lost 2 games. They lost that game to Baylor in 2014. 2015, he was hurt during the Oklahoma game that they lost in Norman. They still scratched and clawed and almost won that. Oklahoma State was a rough afternoon in Stillwater, and they took it on the chin that day. But, I mean, other than that, he was perfect as far as getting dubs on a weekly basis. And the Peach Bowl was a huge moment. Getting left out of the playoff, showing everyone that team belonged. And still in my mind, that 2014 team, they could have won it all. I firmly believe that. And I know a lot of you do. ultimately, I think not having a conference title game really hurt that group because they didn't have a chance to go avenge that Baylor loss, but they had the talent and ability to get it done. They were stacked. And honestly, I think 2015 might have been an even more impressive season for Trey because that team was so banged up. And whether it was the Kansas State game where they fell behind big and had to come back, similar thing in Ames, they fell behind early against Iowa State and had to get back in that ball game. That Texas Tech game in Lubbock where him and Pat Mahomes were just going at it and throwing the ball all over the place. And he obviously hits Aaron Green in the end zone on that miraculous tip drill touchdown. But, I mean, the way he was so clutch for them, I mentioned those games, but also in 2014, the throw to Listenby to get them in field goal range to win that ball game in Morgantown. You know, I mean, it wasn't ideal, but having to make sure you found a way to win in Lawrence against a really bad Kansas team on a cold, day late in the season. They obliterated Texas 2 seasons in a row. Like, he just checks all the boxes. And from a stats perspective, I mean, 10,728 passing yards, 61% completion percentage, 86 touchdowns, 37 picks, 2,049 rushing yards, 27 touchdowns. Best season was from a stats perspective, was in 2014. 3,901 passing yards, 707 rushing yards, 41 total touchdowns, 33 touchdowns through the air, 8 rushing. They put up 82 points on Tech that year. Like, that offense was just so electric, and they could score at a moment's notice. Josh Doxson was obviously amazing. Aaron Green. That receiving core, I think, was really underrated. I mean, Ty Slanina, Deontay Gray, Listenby, like, they just had so many dudes who could go get it done. But there were so many big games for the years. I mean, the moment where Trey juked out 7 or 8 guys, and he gets against West Virginia, and they're playing in the Carter, and he gets to the sideline, and Dana Holgerson just has to give him a high five because he's like, what do I do with this, right? The blackout game against Kansas State in 2014 where, outside of Baylor, K-State was the best team in the league, and that was a big, all right, this is a huge moment to show off that this team can win with style points and really bury a good team, and they did that. That's why ultimately I go with Boykin. They're all amazing players. I mean, Andy Dalton did an outstanding job for a long time, and he was incredible. And again, he got them the Rose Bowl. They won. They were undefeated that year. They only lost 1 game the year before. I think after his freshman year, he was 34-5 as a starter. He was just a winner, and that's what he did. And he was also not that electric of a runner, but he knew when to escape the pocket, get things done with his legs. He knew when to pull the ball in the zone read. He had a great understanding of all that. And he went on to have an outstanding pro career, and still is, in the league, and has made a really good living, first as a starter in Cincinnati and then as a backup in a few different places, including in Dallas 1 year. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Best quarterback of all time. I think everybody's going to be a little bit biased to maybe, whether it's peak fandom or the years you were on campus. So, for me, I was a student between 2012 and 2014. So all of those memories are kind of burned in my brain. It's really hard for me to turn that off. But, I mean, they're all great options. And it was really fun. I mean, if you get a chance, just look up Andy Dalton highlights and Trevone Boykin highlights and Max Duggan highlights and watch those. Because I was doing that as I was preparing for this, just kind of jog my memory of anything that I might have missed. And, that's a fun time. It's pretty awesome to watch that. It gets you ready for football season to see those guys making plays and all of them incredible athletes, great leaders, everything you want from that position. And what we hope we get from Josh Hoover this upcoming season, even though it's gonna look different because he's not quite the dual threat that those guys are. But I think Josh has a chance to be, that type of player eventually in his career. And I think we saw flashes of really good quarterback play this past season. It's just about getting more consistency this upcoming year as we get closer to actual football, which is coming here in a few days with fall practice and then the season here in about a month or so. When we come back, we will actually change gears a little bit and talk some women's hoops, some exciting news from Mark Campbell's squad. So we'll get into that next. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team, and we do it here every day. If you need tickets, you need to download the Gametime app today. Gametime app makes it super easy for you. They have a promo code, Locked On College. Get $20 off your first purchase at Locked On College. Terms and conditions, as always, do apply. A couple things I love about the Gametime app. Again, they make the process really simple for you, but you can get tickets even up to the day of the event. So if you procrastinate a little bit, or if you're just somebody who's like, I want to see how low these prices can go, and I'm going to kind of wait it out and see if these deals get better, then you can do that on the Gametime app. They have they'll show you exactly what the view from your seat's going to look like. There'll be a picture, and they'll show you this is what you're going to see when you sit down at this game, comedy show, concert, whatever the case is. Download the Gametime app today. Again, $20 off if you use that promo code Locked On College. The best place to get tickets. I use it personally. Gametime tickets for sporting events, concerts, movies, whatever the case is. Download the Gametime app today and make it part of your rotation. Locked On College, that promo code for $20 off. So let's talk some women's basketball for a minute. I talked men's and women's hoops yesterday, and it's pretty amazing. I saw this news come down earlier today, and Jamie Plunkett, who does a really good job covering that program, he had a note on it. TCU women's basketball, they're going to play South Carolina, the defending national champions this upcoming season, and that game's going to be in Dickies Arena. So, hey, there you go, getting to match up against the best team in the country. Dawn Staley obviously has done an incredible job, but playing the defending champs on December 8th, and a neutral site game, but it's in Fort Worth and Dickies Arena. That'll be a great measuring stick for this group. Haley Van Lith, Maddie Shear, Donovan Hunter, Sedona Prince coming back, Madison Connor coming back. A lot of talent on this roster. And I was thinking the other day, because Mark Campbell had a really good interview with Jamie Plunkett on the Frogs Insider podcast. It doesn't take long to, with a basketball program, you can flip the script pretty quickly and get them into contention, especially now with the transfer portal, because you can go get 3 or 4 talented players, and then, that's the majority of your starters, right? You can really flip that roster almost entirely. We saw that with the men's team this year and somewhat with the women's team as well. But then the challenge becomes that upper echelon of the sport, the South Carolinas, UConn, LSU. That's a tough Iowa. We'll see what they do post Caitlin Clark, but that's a really tough place to break into because the separation there, the gap there is still pretty large. But we'll get a really good picture of, okay, what is this team like? What's actually their ceiling? Can they run with the best of the best? And that's exciting. It's good to test yourself in that way in non-conference play. It's also just amazing how quickly he's flipped the brand. TCU women's basketball was not talked about in the national conversation at all in the last few years. And then all of a sudden, unfortunately, they got some publicity this year because they had so many people out with injuries and they had to postpone some games and that kind of thing. But this offseason, you go get Haley Van Lith. You do a lot of great work in the transfer portal. I also saw Jazzy Davidson, who is a 5-star prospect for 2025, the number 2 player in the country, according to 247 Sports. She's interested in TCU. Her list right now is USC, UCLA, Duke, Connecticut, TCU, and Texas. Now, obviously, there's some schools on that list that have had a lot more success in the sport than TCU has recently. But I think it's incredible that, TCU's in the conversation, right? That's a big deal that in the span of, one season and some change, they've gotten to a place where 5-star high school recruits are at least saying, hey, I want to see what's going on there. The vibes seem really high, and I need to see at least what the deal is. Let me see what she said about TCU. Coach Mark Campbell is an amazing coach, his resume and how he coached at Oregon when Sabrina Ionescu was there. They have a good recruiting class coming in, and he's building a powerhouse at TCU. So that's high praise for one of the best players in the country. And, at Oregon, that's what he was known for. He was a recruiter. That's what he did. And then, he took that to his first job and is now coming to TCU and doing the same thing. And I imagine, the Frogs have put some resources behind him as well that have helped. But it's just crazy that they've flipped it so quickly and in a big way. That's awesome. When we come back, we'll wrap things up and get some of your thoughts. But, yeah, TCU women's basketball playing South Carolina in December at Dickies Arena and also being in the mix for some of the best. Mark Campbell and company, and a great job by him. We'll wrap things up when we come back. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I talked yesterday about TCU going after Adam Schobel, a 2025 recruit quarterback who's playing his ball at Columbus. Columbus is one of the best programs in 4A football. They got upended by Lorena last year in the playoffs, but had a really successful season up to that point. And they're one of the favorites again to make it to the state title game. And Adam's cousin, John, is currently playing or is currently committed to TCU for 2025. He has roots here, right? Like his dad and his uncle played at TCU and then went on to play in the NFL, so he's a legacy. But TCU trying to bridge that gap and build that relationship after having such a long period of time where they had their quarterback, they thought, in Ty Hawkins, and then he flips to SMU. So we'll see if they can get him committed at some point, but they're at least trying to make it happen. Richard Berry said, regarding high-end quarterbacks, it's a heck of a lot easier to win with a loaded team and a QB such as Duggan than it is to win with a cruddy team and a guy like Caleb Williams. Yeah, preferably you'd have both, right? But I think there's multiple ways to get it done. And I said this offseason, I think Josh Hoover is going to end up being a good quarterback. It feels like what they decided to do is they're going to try to build this thing around him and have a complete football team and then allow him to be successful. But, you need talented guys in that room. And right now they got Josh Hoover, Ken Seals, Haas Haney. They feel pretty good about where they're at. And so is it a necessity to have a 2025 quarterback? Not necessarily. You can always go get somebody in the transfer portal, but you want to have as much talent as possible on the roster. Tommy Fisher said TCU was wise not to get in a bidding war with Hawkins. From what I gather, he got more money than anyone on the TCU roster, and he wasn't going to play for 2 to 3 years. Anyway, if you're going to spend that kind of money, go after a proven player in the portal that we know can play. And he says he doesn't see a huge need to have a quarterback in this class, but he thinks it's good to have one in every class. Yeah, I agree. I don't feel like it's not priority number one, but you'd like to have somebody in the wings each and every year so that you can always kind of pivot if you have to. And I don't know all the details about Ty and SMU and what he's getting paid, but I've heard similar things that he was just getting a huge offer from the Ponies and decided to go that direction. And, you don't have a salary cap in college sports, but you do have a limit on resources. And so you have to make these decisions, and there's tough decisions to make. So it's tough to do that. And we'll see whether or not it pays off. Big Easy said, Steven, most of the national gurus have SMU whipping our Frogs. What's your spin on how SMU has leapfrogged TCU, especially when TCU devalued the SMU series? Well, honestly, I haven't really seen that. Now, I haven't gotten too in the weeds and game-by-game predictions. I've kind of kept it, I guess, in the big picture, like win totals, that type of thing. But I'll have to look into that. I don't get that vibe. I think SMU is certainly on the rise, and they're probably kind of a trendy program to follow right now because they're making so many moves. But I think TCU's in a great spot, and I really feel good about that match as long as Coach Dykes is here. I think it means something to him. He's done a good job the last few seasons getting those guys up to play that game. And, yeah, as far as the series goes, I think it kind of stinks that it's ending, but, TCU made a decision about that a long time ago, and I feel like what happened last year was just a culmination of a lot of seasons of wanting to see that sort of come to an end, at least from their perspective. And Brian Capers had some very nice things to say about the show. Thank you, man. Thank you for listening every day and watching, and appreciate your input. You're awesome. All the fans are, or people that don't like the show, they're awesome too. I get it. I'm putting my content out in the world. Some people love it, some people don't, but I'm really glad that you're a fan of the show and that you're a regular person who tunes in. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about best QB of all time, as well as the rest of you. YouTube comments or tweet at me at SMCockSteven. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.